Gideon Nash thought he was buying a ruined house for $5, the kind of foolish bargain only a man with nothing left would even consider, but he would soon learn that some purchases do not ask for money at all, because they demand blood, loyalty, and the kind of courage that changes who you are forever. The paper trembled slightly in his fingers as he stood on the porch, not from fear, but from the weight of what that single signature had already set into motion, because deals made at the edge of town were never just about land, and everyone knew that houses abandoned in silence were usually abandoned for a reason. He pushed the door open, and the smell hit him first. Old wood, damp dust, and the lingering rot of something left unfinished, as evening light poured through a torn curtain and painted the floor with drifting specks that looked like ash from a fire that had burned out long ago, though the house itself felt anything but dead. Then he heard it. Not a sound meant to be heard, not something loud enough to warn, but a thin, broken rasp that clawed at the air, followed by the slow creak of rope rubbing against wood, back and forth, like time itself being pulled tight. Gideon froze. The back door stood ajar, swaying gently in the breeze, and just beyond it, framed by dust and dying light, hung a figure that made his blood turn cold, because this was no ghost and no shadow, but a living woman suspended between breath and silence. Her feet scraped the floor, barely holding her weight, while the rope cut deep into her neck, hands bound behind her back, body sagging as if death had already begun its claim and was simply waiting for permission to finish the job. Gideon did not think. He moved. The knife was in his hand before the danger fully reached his mind. The rope snapped apart under steel, and the woman collapsed into him with a weight that was real, solid, and unmistakably alive. Her fingers clutching his shirt like a warrior grabbing onto the edge of the world. Her breath came in violent gasps, every inhale a fight, every exhale a refusal to surrender, and when her eyes finally opened, they did not plead or beg, but burned with something sharp and furious that made Gideon realize he had not saved a victim. He had cut down a storm. "Are you the owner?" she rasped, her voice rough as broken stone, each word dragged up from somewhere deep and unyielding. Gideon nodded once, steady and slow. "I just bought it." She laughed, a dry, fractured sound that carried no humor at all, as if the idea of survival itself had become ironic. "Then you bought more than a house," she said, breath shuddering. "You bought my life." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it something else, distant hooves, not close enough yet to see, but near enough to promise that whatever had put her on that rope was not finished. Gideon felt it settle in his chest, heavy and final. For $5, he had purchased a war. He carried her inside, every step across the groaning floorboards feeling like a declaration, because whoever had tried to kill her had done so with confidence, and confident men always returned to collect what they believed belonged to them. He laid her on the couch, dust rising as her body sank into it, and when he turned to find water, she tried to sit up, despite the tremor running through her limbs. One hand pressed to her throat, where the rope had branded her like a warning. "I am not going to hurt you," Gideon said quietly, holding the bowl out where she could see it, where trust might begin to exist again. She studied him the way a cornered animal studies an unfamiliar path, then drank, slow and deliberate, never once lowering her guard. That was when Gideon noticed the envelope. It sat alone on the table, perfectly centered, untouched by dust, as if it had been waiting for him specifically, and the words written across it tightened his jaw before he even opened it. "To the new owner, please save her." The letter inside was brief, desperate, and heavy with failure, written by a woman who had tried and lost, who had fled but refused to forget, who warned that false laws and manufactured debts had bound the woman beside him into chains no court wanted to see. "If you are a good man," the letter pleaded, "protect her. If not, they will come to reclaim their property." Gideon folded the paper slowly and turned back toward the couch. "Who are you?" he asked. She met his gaze without flinching, even now. "My name is Zana," she said. "I am Apache." The silence that followed was not awkward, but loaded, because names carried weight in places like this, and identities were often used as weapons long before guns were drawn. "Why were you hanging in that room?" Gideon asked. Zana's eyes hardened, her jaw setting. "Because I fought him," she said. "Because I refused to be owned." Gideon glanced at the rope marks, the bruises, the strength still coiled beneath injury. "He did not mean to kill you," he said carefully. "He meant to come back." "If he returns," Zana replied, voice low and certain, "I will kill him." Gideon exhaled slowly. "He will not come alone." "I am not afraid to die." "That," Gideon said, crossing his arms, "is exactly what worries me." The wind rose outside, rattling the boards, and Zana finally lay back, eyes closing not in defeat, but in preparation, because warriors rested when they could, not when they felt safe. Gideon locked the door, his hand resting on the gun atop the table, and understood with absolute clarity that the man who had tied that rope would return before dawn, backed by money, men, and the law twisted into something ugly. As night fell, the house seemed to shrink, every creak sounding louder, every shadow deeper, while firelight revealed the damage done to Zana's body, proof of what happened when power went unchallenged for too long. "Do you hear that?" Gideon asked. Zana nodded. "Something is coming." Hooves echoed faintly, then faded. Not an attack yet, but a reminder. And Gideon checked his revolver with the calm of someone who had already accepted the cost of his choice. Zana tried to rise again, weaponless but unbroken, and when Gideon stopped her, she growled that she didn't hide behind anyone. "Good," he replied. "Then let me stand in front." The knock came hard and deliberate. Not the knock of a neighbor, but of a man who believed the door would open because it always had before. Gideon cracked it open, finding a long-coated figure with a crooked smile, eyes already scanning for what he intended to reclaim. "This house belongs to me," the man said easily, "and so does everything inside it." Gideon stepped forward, voice flat and unyielding. "Not anymore." The man smiled wider. "By morning," he said, "the law will remind you how ownership works." The door closed, hooves thundered away, and the silence that followed was heavier than the threat itself. Zana tightened her grip on the axe Gideon placed in her hands, fire returning to her eyes. "I will not hang again," she said. Gideon looked out into the dark, where the night seemed to lean closer with every breath. "Neither will you," he replied. And somewhere beyond the trees, plans were already being made, papers already being stamped, and men already riding toward a house bought for $5, unaware that by dawn, nothing would belong to them anymore. The night did not settle after the riders left, because nights like this never truly grew quiet. They only waited, stretching thin and tense like a wire pulled tight between two posts, ready to snap the moment someone leaned too hard on hope. Gideon moved through the house without speaking, not because there was nothing to say, but because every sound mattered now, every step counted, and the old boards beneath his boots groaned like they were already warning the world where to strike first. Zana watched him from the corner of the room, her breathing steadier than before, her posture straighter despite the pain still burning along her neck. Because warriors did not relax just because death had missed them once. They prepared for when it tried again with friends. "This place will not hold long," she said, her voice low but certain, eyes tracking the windows and doors, like she was measuring weak points in a battlefield. Gideon slid a sack of grain against the door, wedging it tight, then glanced at the cracked frame above it. "We do not need forever," he replied. "We need until morning." Zana nodded, though something unreadable flickered across her face, because mornings were dangerous things for people who had been wronged. Mornings brought law, and law often arrived wearing the same smile as cruelty. The fire popped in the stove, sending sparks of light across the walls, and Gideon checked his rifle again, then the revolver, then the knife at his belt, not out of fear, but habit, because preparation was the only language violence respected. Zana reached for a kitchen blade she had found earlier, running it slowly along a stone, the sound soft but sharp enough to cut through thought, because steel had a way of focusing the mind when promises meant nothing. "This man," Gideon said after a long moment, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the window. "He believes debt makes people disappear." Zana's jaw tightened. "He believes law belongs to whoever can afford it." Silence returned, thick and waiting, until hooves sounded again, closer this time, but slower, careful, as if whoever approached wanted to be heard, wanted the door opened without blood spilling first. Gideon raised a hand, signaling stillness. The knock came 3 times, controlled, deliberate. Zana shifted, blade ready, muscles coiled despite the pain. A voice followed, firm but measured. "Gideon Nash," it called. "It's Marshal Briggs." Zana's eyes narrowed instantly. "Law," she whispered, not with relief, but with warning. Gideon opened the door only enough to see the man standing there, dust on his coat, hand resting near his holster. Gaze already sharp with questions that had waited too long for answers. Briggs stepped inside, eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Zana, on the red mark circling her neck, and something hardened behind his calm expression. "He did that to you," Briggs said, not asking. Zana met his gaze without hesitation. "He tried to own me." Briggs exhaled slowly, anger kept on a tight leash. "You are not the first," he said, "just the first still breathing." Gideon stiffened. "You knew." "I suspected," Briggs replied, "but suspicion does not put men in chains." Briggs pulled a leather pouch from his coat and set it on the table, loosening the tie just enough to reveal folded documents, stamped and unsigned, evidence that was close to becoming something dangerous. "We found part of what Emmeline left behind," he continued. "Debt ledgers, false contracts, signatures forced or forged, but none of it sticks without a witness." Zana straightened, the fire in her eyes returning full force. "Then you have one." Briggs studied her for a long moment, weighing courage against consequence. "Testifying means he will come for you harder," he warned. "Men like him do not lose quietly." "I am done being quiet," Zana replied. Briggs nodded once, then turned to Gideon. "There is a problem," he said. "To move this through the court by morning, the remaining debt must be paid, even if it was built on lies." Gideon did not hesitate. "I will cover it." Briggs blinked. "That is not a small sum." Gideon's voice stayed steady. "Neither is her life." The marshal looked at him differently then, respect replacing calculation. "I will return at first light with the warrant," Briggs said. "Until then, you keep her alive." Zana let out a dry laugh. "That will not be the hard part." Briggs left as quietly as he had come, his silhouette swallowed by the night, and when the door closed again, the house seemed smaller, as if it understood that daylight would demand answers. Zana sat back against the wall, shoulders tight, eyes distant for the first time. "I have seen men promise protection before," she said. "It always came with chains." Gideon sat across from her, resting the rifle across his knees. I owned land once, he said slowly. A ranch big enough to hear your own thoughts echo. Zana listened without interrupting. My wife and son died during the sickness, he continued. I sold the land because silence became louder than grief. He looked up at her. I left them behind. Zana's gaze softened, just slightly. And you swore not to leave again. Yes. The fire cracked louder, as if marking the vow. Outside, an owl cried, sharp and sudden, and Zana rose carefully to her feet, testing her balance, refusing to show weakness even now. He will return with men, she said. And paper. Gideon nodded. And fear. Zana tightened her grip on the blade. Fear only works if you bow. They worked through the remaining hours like two soldiers who did not need orders, barricading windows, positioning themselves, counting angles, turning a collapsing house into something that resembled a stand. Just before dawn, the ground began to tremble. Not one rider. Many. Zana peered through the crack in the door, breath steady but eyes burning. He brought an army. Gideon stepped beside her, seeing torches, rifles, horses packed tight, and at the front, the long coat billowing in the cold wind, papers held high like a weapon. The voice cut through the early light. Open the door, it commanded. By law, what hides inside belongs to me. Gideon's jaw clenched. The moment had arrived, and no matter how this ended, nothing would ever return to how it had been before. The dawn did not arrive gently, because mornings forged by fear never did, and as the first thin line of orange cut across the horizon, it revealed not peace, but numbers. Horses packed shoulder to shoulder, rifles slung without hesitation, and men who believed the law was strongest when it shouted the loudest. Gideon stepped onto the porch slowly, revolver low but visible, his posture calm in a way that unsettled men who expected panic, because nothing unnerved bullies more than someone who had already accepted the worst. Zana followed, the bruises at her neck still dark and unmistakable, her presence alone cracking the confidence of a few riders who had not expected to see the woman from the rope standing upright and unbroken. The man in the long coat raised the papers higher, his voice ringing sharp across the yard. By order of this town, he declared, this property and the individual hiding inside it are to be returned to their rightful owner. Gideon did not raise his gun. You do not own people, he said evenly. And you never did. A murmur moved through the riders, subtle but real, because some of them had daughters, sisters, debts of their own, and truth had a way of slipping through cracks no matter how tightly lies were nailed down. The man sneered. She is in arrears, he said. Signed contracts, witnessed and sealed. Zana stepped forward then, her voice carrying farther than anyone expected. I signed nothing, she said. I was bound, beaten, and threatened until silence became the only option left to me. A few men shifted in their saddles. The long coat snapped back. You expect us to believe in Apache over paper? Before Gideon could respond, another horse broke from the tree line at full speed, dust kicking up behind it like a warning shot fired by the land itself. Marshal Briggs rode straight between them, pulling hard on the reins, his coat flaring as he raised a stamped folder high above his head. No one moves, he commanded. This ends now. The yard went still. Briggs dismounted, boots hitting dirt with authority earned the hard way, and opened the folder slowly, deliberately, making sure every eye stayed fixed on him. Warrant for the arrest of Vickers, he read aloud, on charges of fraud, unlawful seizure of property, and attempted murder. The name landed like a blow. The long-coated man's smile vanished instantly, replaced by something sharp and desperate. You do not have the authority, he snapped. My money does not outrank the law, Briggs cut in. Not today. Weapons wavered. Some riders lowered their rifles. Others glanced at each other, suddenly uncertain which side would still be standing when this ended. Vickers' eyes darted, calculating. Then he laughed, short and brittle. "You really think this woman will speak in court?" he said. "No judge will believe her." Zana met his gaze without blinking. "I do not need them to like me," she said. "I need them to hear me." That was when Vickers snapped. The gun came up fast, aimed not at Gideon, not at Briggs, but at Zaina, because cruelty always tried to silence the strongest voice first. Time slowed. Gideon shouted her name. A gunshot cracked the air. Dust exploded near the horses, screams breaking loose as one rider toppled sideways, clutching his shoulder in disbelief, staring at his own weapon as if it had betrayed him. Zana moved. She surged forward, axe handle swinging hard, smashing the barrel of Vickers' pistol aside, the weapon flying uselessly into the dirt. Vickers stumbled back, panic overtaking calculation, and lunged with a knife pulled from his sleeve, the last trick of a man who knew he was losing control. Zana caught his wrist mid-strike, twisted hard, and drove him to his knees with a force that sent dust spiraling. "You wanted me quiet," she growled, voice shaking the air. "Now you will listen." Briggs was on him instantly, deputies closing in, iron biting down around Vickers' wrists as his shouts turned to pleading, then rage, then hollow threats that no longer carried weight. As he was dragged away, he screamed back over his shoulder, "This is not over." Gideon stepped close, voice low and final. "For you," he said. "It is." The crowd began to disperse, weapons lowered, courage draining as quickly as it had gathered, because bullies rarely stayed once they realized they were not the biggest force in the yard. Silence returned, broken only by the wind. Zana stood still, breathing deep, the rope's mark still visible but no longer defining her, because survival had rewritten its meaning. Briggs approached her carefully. "Tomorrow," he said, "you testify, and this ends the right way." Zana nodded. "I will be there." Gideon looked at the ruined house, the broken boards, the barricades that had held just long enough, and realized something had shifted that could not be undone. Justice had stepped onto the dirt. And it was hungry. The town woke uneasy that morning because news traveled faster than sleep ever could, and by the time Gideon and Zana rode in under the rising sun, eyes were already watching from behind shutters, weighing which side of justice would survive the day. The courthouse stood at the center like a judge that had forgotten how to listen, its steps worn smooth by years of boots that climbed them with confidence and left without answers. And as Zana dismounted, the murmurs followed her like a current pulling at her back. Some stared with open disbelief, others with discomfort, because seeing a woman who had been meant to vanish walk openly into the light forced people to remember what they had chosen not to see. Gideon stayed close, not shielding her but present, because standing beside someone was sometimes louder than standing in front of them. Inside, the room felt too small. Benches filled quickly. Farmers, traders, men who had once signed papers they never understood, women who had learned to keep quiet because quiet was safer. And at the front, Vickers sat in chains, spine stiff, face already rehearsing indignation. The judge entered without ceremony, his expression tired, not cruel, but worn by years of compromise. And when he called the room to order, silence fell sharp and expectant. The charges were read: fraud, unlawful seizure, attempted murder. Vickers scoffed openly, shaking his head as if the words themselves were an insult, because men like him believed confidence could substitute for innocence. Then Zana was called forward. She walked alone, no escort, no protection, just steady steps and a straight back, because the strongest defiance often came without weapons. She spoke slowly, deliberately, not rushing, not softening the truth, because truth did not need decoration to be devastating. She spoke of debts invented overnight, of signatures demanded under threat, of laws explained only after punishment, of a rope tied carefully enough to terrify but not kill. The room shifted. A farmer stood, then another. One by one, voices joined hers, stories overlapping, patterns emerging until the illusion of isolated cases collapsed under its own weight. Vickers' lawyer rose, sharp and polished, slicing at words, at identity, at credibility, trying to turn survival into suspicion. But something had changed, because the room no longer listened the way it once had. When the judge called a recess, the air buzzed with tension, not relief, because unfinished justice always made people nervous. Outside, Gideon felt it before he saw it. The shift, the wrongness, the way Zana stiffened beside him, eyes narrowing toward the alley behind the building. A man stepped out. Then another. Not deputies, not townsfolk. Men who had not come to listen. The blade flashed. Gideon moved without thinking, shoving Zana aside as steel grazed air where her throat had been moments before, the attacker stumbling as Gideon drove him back hard against the wall. The second man ran. Shots rang out. Deputies swarmed. The attacker was taken alive, shaking, fear replacing loyalty the moment blood entered the equation. Inside the courtroom, the attempt landed like a verdict. By the time proceedings resumed, Vickers' confidence was gone, replaced by something raw and dangerous, because when power failed in public, it always tried to destroy what it could not control. The judge's gavel fell. Guilty, on all counts. A sound moved through the room, not cheers, but release, the kind that came when a long-held breath finally escaped. Vickers was led away shouting promises that no one bothered to answer because his voice no longer mattered. Outside, the sun stood high. Zana closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in freedom that still felt unreal, while Gideon watched the crowd disperse, knowing this was not an ending, only a turning. Briggs approached, his tone lighter than before. "You did it." "We did," Gideon corrected. Briggs nodded. "There will be fallout." "There always is," Zana said calmly. They rode back toward the old house as evening crept in again, the road quieter now, but not empty, because consequences followed even victories, and Gideon felt the weight of a choice settling heavier with every mile. At the porch, Zana paused. "You could leave now," she said. "No one would blame you." Gideon looked at the house, then at her, then back at the horizon. "I already left once," he said. "I am not doing it again." The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a door closed, and somewhere closer, something new began to take shape. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The house did not look the same when they returned, not because the walls had changed, but because what it had survived now lived inside it, and places remembered things like that, even when people pretended they did not. The town moved differently in the days that followed, quieter, slower, like it was learning to walk without leaning on fear, because when a man like Vickers fell publicly, it left a hollow where certainty once lived, and not everyone knew what to do with it. Gideon watched from the porch as farmers passed who once would not have met his eyes, now nodding in acknowledgement, not gratitude, but recognition, because standing up had reminded them they could still choose who they were. Zana spent her mornings outside, breathing in open air without ropes or guards, testing freedom the way a warrior tested ground after a long winter, careful, alert, but no longer expecting the earth to give way beneath her feet. The court moved fast after that, faster than anyone expected, because when lies collapsed, they often took entire structures with them, and debts once enforced with violence were quietly erased with ink. Families returned land. Names were cleared. Silence broke. One evening, Briggs rode out alone, dust trailing behind him, a folder tucked under his arm, lighter than the last one, because justice weighed less once it was written correctly. "It's finished," he said, handing the papers to Zana. "No contracts, no claims, no chains hiding behind law." Zana held the folder for a long moment, then closed it gently, like something that had finally stopped fighting back. Briggs turned to Gideon. "You could sell the house now," he said. "Make a profit off the legend." Gideon shook his head. "Some things aren't for sale." When Briggs rode away, the prairie stretched wide and quiet, and for the first time since the night of the rope, nothing felt like it was chasing them. Zana stood beside Gideon on the porch as dusk settled in, the same place where the war had begun, the same boards that had creaked under fear, now holding steady under something else entirely. "I was raised to believe survival was the highest honor," she said. "I was wrong." Gideon waited. "Standing," she continued. "Standing is." Gideon nodded, understanding more than words could hold, because some lessons only made sense once everything else had been stripped away. She turned to him then, not as someone rescued, not as someone owed, but as an equal who had chosen to stay. "I will leave if you ask," she said, "but I will not disappear." Gideon looked at the house, at the land, at the horizon that no longer felt empty. "Then stay," he said simply, "not because you have to, because you want to." Zana smiled, not wide, not easy, but real, the kind of smile built from endurance rather than relief. The sign out front still read, "Lucky Home," faded and cracked, but truer now than it had ever been, because luck had nothing to do with it, and choice had everything. A $5 house had bought a stand against injustice. It had bought a voice back from silence. It had bought 2 lives, the chance to stop running. And out here, in a land that remembered cruelty as easily as it remembered courage, that mattered more than legends ever could. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that one decision can still change everything, then leave a comment below and tell me what part stayed with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe because there are many more stories waiting, and I would be honored to tell them with you.